on YouTube afterwards as well, so that'll be great. My name is Joe Barth. I am the chapter leader for AZUG, Arizona SQL Server Users Group. We are a local chapter to Phoenix. We focus on SQL Server and business intelligence, data analytics. I'd like to thank you for viewing today. Right now, I'm going to do a little community news, and then we'll get on to our speaker. PASS, Professional Association of SQL Server, and here is the August, what's going on, what's happening in the next couple months. Pretty exciting. PASS Summit 2017. So PASS Summit, if you guys don't know, is the international conference for Professional Association of SQL Server. It's more than likely, usually it's held in Seattle. I think they have it for the next couple of years. They're scheduled. So it'll be happening in October, from October 31st to November 3rd. And great week. If you have ever been to any SQL Saturday throughout the United States, it's 3 days of SQL Saturday. 5,000 attendees, over 200 speaking tracks. Great week. Fun packed. They have a lot of different events going. They're trying different things every year, which is cool. We don't want to be just known as SQL Server. We are data professionals, and they also tend to do a lot of different data analytics tracks and things like that. I will be there next year. I know Ginger will definitely this year in October, representing AZUG, and then also I know Ginger will be there. I know a lot of people from International Cruises and Excursions will be there, like Jeff Schmidt and the crew there. So if you can make it out there, please don't forget to ask me for the promotion code. It'll get you $150 off registration. I know it's expensive, but it is definitely worth the week and worth the time going out there. So we are also holding a PASS BA Day in San Diego. That is October 3rd. So that's coming up in another month. There's a summer special at a discounted rate, 20% off. There are 2 different talks. Applied Data Science in a World of Big Data, Dean Abbott. And then also telling compelling stories using data to achieve business goals. So, so immerse yourself in a day of intense learning guided by expert speakers. So we do have that available to you. So what is PASS? You know, we've been in association for a very long time now. We have 250,000 people that are user group that are in the world. So we're a worldly group. Let me get that straight. U.S., Canada open. There are different continents that we've opened our doors to, and it's really huge. So we do need people to run that. So we have director at large elections. There are 3 seats up for the election of 2018-2019 term. So please go to the pass.com site, the pass.org site, and then you know, either email governance@pass if you're interested in running, or you know, I know that we are. So the applications for that are from August 16th to 25th. But then also, you know, we're going to end up voting on those as well. So be a part of that. But what they're looking for, these PASS board members, you know, the different types of attributes. I will post this on Meetup. So you guys can get to it. You know what we're looking for in a PASS board member. So please be a part of that. It's very important to continue this high quality of what we do as PASS as an association going forward. So just email that. There is a Passion Award. Every year they give a Passion Award based on what the community nominates people for different aspects of helping out with PASS that demonstrates exceptional dedication and enthusiasm for the PASS community. What do they do? SQL Saturdays? Do they help out with PASS Summit? Do they help out with the monthly user groups? Those type of people, we like to recognize those. So please do that with the Passion Awards. So obviously we're kind of doing a virtual meeting here, but there are virtual groups out there. I know we have our local AZUG user group that meets in person, but then there are also virtual groups as well. As you can see, there are a couple going on tonight. So please take advantage of all the learning that you can. about data, different aspects of data. So in the next month, business analytics is August 17th. DBA fundamentals is August 22nd. Database administration 23rd. And so on. There's all these different aspects and places where you can learn and make that a great experience. So all the virtual groups are on there. So let's move on from that. Let's talk about SQL Saturday. If you don't know what SQL Saturday is, it's a great day of learning. So we have 45-minute talks on different aspects of SQL Server or databases or data analytics. Now, they're held throughout the United States. So look, go to SQLSaturday.com and look what's coming up or what's in the future, because man, they have them scheduled out to next February. So there's going on right now in Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Vancouver. We are actually holding a second SQL Saturday called Phoenix BI Edition, which focuses primarily on the business analytics and business intelligence and data analytics tracks. So it's going to be a great day. It's going to be much smaller than our usual one that we have in March. So we're only allowing 150 people to attend. And so please sign up now. We have it half full. There is a waiting list in case people do drop out, but get on there. It's $10. We're going to do food trucks. We're going to have food trucks come and we're going to give you a token that's $10 worth, and so you can go and pay for your lunch at the food trucks with the tokens, or you can buy more if you want to. So there's throughout the world. Remember, SQL Saturdays is not just in Phoenix, it's not just in the United States, it's all over the world. Please look at that and make sure that you guys attend them. They're really $10 for lunch, and that's all you pay. So, and you do at the end of the day, do have some raffles and you network, and you should learn a lot about different aspects of databases and SQL Server. So don't forget, the local chapters do need your help. Reach out to those people and make sure that you're known that you want to be a part of the group, that you want to help with the monthly meetings, the SQL Saturdays. It all works under, people doing it for no cost at all. So stay involved. Just go to pass.org, and they've revamped the whole site. So it's just very similar to the SQL Saturday one, where they've revamped and put a whole new sleeve on Arizona.SQL. It's Arizona.pass.org now, but they've revamped the whole site. Make sure you sign up if you go to our user group in Phoenix. Sign up at meetup.com. We also have a LinkedIn page, so we definitely have all the social media going, which is really cool. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to Mr. Tim Radney of SQL Skills. He is a principal consultant and a SQL Server MVP. Let's see, go ahead and I would like to thank him for doing that. The group would like to thank him. We sent him an Amazon $100 gift card. I know he takes time out of his busy schedule to be with us and help us out by showing and sharing his knowledge. He did a great job last year, and we're really excited about him this year. And he takes the time to do that. So thank you, sir. I'm going to give you the reins and let you continue the talk, and I'll stop talking because I always talk too much. So Tim, thank you again.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. This is Azure SQL Database for the Production DBA. I've been given this session for close to 2 years now, and Azure's been out for a while. When Azure SQL Database first came out, it was very, very limited. There were only a few in the industry that were actually blogging and trying to promote it. And several years ago, I was at a SQL Intersection conference and got to talking with Bob Ward, and found out that this really was a enterprise-ready platform now for SQL as a service. So I started digging into it, and I took the approach of, I'm a production DBA, I'm not a big developer, don't do a lot of ETL type work. So if one of my clients or a company I was working for decided to move our mission critical systems into Azure SQL Database, how would my job change? So that's how this session is kind of set up. We're going to learn a lot about, or I'm going to kind of go through and step you through what Azure SQL Database offers, and then we're going to talk about differences, so you can get a good idea of how would your job change if your business, your employer decided to move your mission critical systems to Azure SQL Database. So that we'll get started. If I can get my screen to advance. All right, so here we go. All right, so as Joseph said, I am with SQL Skills. We are a team of some pretty good folks. We have Paul Randall, Kimberly Tripp, Glenn Berry, Aaron Stellato, Jonathan Cahias, and myself. We do instructor-led training kind of all over the world. For 2017, we're pretty well staying in the US. We actually have classes going on this week in Bellevue, Washington, and then we'll be back in Chicago in October. We do online training through Pluralsight. If you're not a Pluralsight subscriber, I have a slide coming up where you can get a free 30 days of all SQL Skills content. And I believe we're up to 52 courses now. There's quite a few of us that are in the middle of another course. So we should have several more releasing this year. We do consulting, of course, health checks, hardware, performance upgrades. Remote DBA, that's where we take care of systems remotely, where we kind of do regular monthly checks and any other type of work that you may need during the month. Conferences, past Summit, we'll have a couple of folks there this year. The rest of us will be in Las Vegas at the SQL Intersection Conference. This year, again, they are the same week. So if you prefer Vegas over Seattle, come see us at SQL Intersection. And you can become a SQL Skills Insider. This is our newsletter that goes out every couple of weeks. Paul sends it out. We have insider videos. We have kind of tips and tricks, consultant corner. There's really no markety, spammy type stuff. It's just SQL Server and kind of what SQL Skills has seen over the past couple of weeks that we found interesting that we'd like to tell you about. I mentioned our classes and how we have those going on right now in Bellevue. Some of the classes we have IE0 is your accidental DBA, 2 weeks of performance tuning. We have the IEHADR. I believe we have taught that for the last time this spring. We also have classes on BI, SSIS, PowerShell, data science, data mining using R, Cortana, and 2 brand new classes, one on Azure, guess who's teaching that one, and then we have one on upgrading to SQL Server 2016. Those will debut in October this year. The 2016, even if you're not upgrading to 2016, we're going to be covering tactics and best practices for just upgrading the SQL Server. Now, we will be covering 2016 features, 2017 features, things like that. But a large portion of this class is, if you're upgrading to 2014, this is the class for you. We're going to be covering migration strategies, application testing, performance testing, benchmarking, all of those things that, regardless of the version of SQL Server that you're going to, will be applicable. We do have a discount for new clients for our health checks. It's a $29.95 flat fee. And you can find out more information about these at SQLskills.com training and services. My vanity slide, the kind of takeaway here, you have my contact information on the slide. So Tim at SQLskills.com, I blog at SQLskills and timradney.com. I'm on Twitter, so at tradney. And the takeaway personal trivia about me, I'm into electronics, aquaponics, have a huge garden. I farm chickens, goats, and tilapia. So I guess if we do the 2 truths and a lie, I like farming. All right, I mentioned Pluralsight. This is my fun slide. I get to give away Paul's email address. So Paul at SQLskills.com. In the subject line, put user group Pluralsight code, and you'll get that 30-day free trial for all SQL Skills content. And like I said, there's a lot of it out there. So the course itself, the session, Azure SQL Database. What are we going to talk about? First, I kind of need to tell you what Azure SQL Database is. And then we'll cover features. And I call it unsupported features. It's really not unsupported features because it's not a feature that they don't support. It's stuff that we're used to, the box version, or when you download that ISO and you install SQL Server, things that we're used to that version doing that we can't do in Azure SQL Database. I'm going to demo creating an Azure SQL Database. We're going to talk about the DTU calculator, and I'll demo it. DTU, you'll learn about what those are. We'll talk about tuning differences, some tuning options, and then we'll end with a tuning demonstration on how to tune an Azure SQL Database. So what is an Azure SQL Database? This is a database as a service. So you've probably heard of infrastructure as a service and software as a service, all these things as a service. So this is SQL Server, a platform of SQL Server running in the cloud that's providing the kind of core engine services. So it's a relational database service running in the cloud. Think of, you've installed SQL Server service, your application engineer, you provide them a database and they connect to it. You provide them username, password, connection string, those types of things, and they can create the database, or they can just create objects within the database and start shoving data into it. It's kind of like, you've provided a private cloud to them. If they can't remote desktop into it, they can just connect through Management Studio or an API. That's kind of what we're looking at with Azure SQL Database. So it's SQL Server is already installed for us, and we get to consume the service. It provides predictable performance and pricing. So you need a certain level of compute, you pay for that, and you're pretty well guaranteed that level of compute. You have elastic database pools for unpredictable workloads. So what this means is, and I have a whole section we're covering elastic pools, but if you have quite a few databases that are installed on an instance that you want to move to Azure, you can pay for those per database for compute. So each one is guaranteed a certain level of compute. Those are DTUs, your database transaction units. Well, if the overall consumption, you're better off just buying a block of compute and letting each database kind of function within that block and managing it, then that's where elastic pools come in. So you can get a certain level of compute, and within certain guidelines, those databases can consume. Think of like a cable modem in your neighborhood. Everybody's subscribing to the same service. They offer up to gigabit, when in reality, you're probably getting 300 or 30 megabit, but you can burst up to gigabit if no one else is using the system. It's kind of like those pool of resources, except you're guaranteed a certain pool, and those databases can share that pool. So they can fluctuate up and down. If one needs 100 DTU for those 20 seconds, and the rest are running at 20 DTU, you just have that kind of threshold that they can work through. There is 4 nines of availability built in, so 99.99% availability. That's kind of difficult to get even in your own data center. And so we're offered that out of the box, regardless of your tier within Azure. Geo-replication and restore services for data protection. SQL Server tools, libraries, and APIs that already exist are supported. So you don't have to download a different version of SQL Server Management Studio in order to connect and manage an Azure SQL database. There's scalability with minimal effort. It used to be that scalability with no downtime. However, what we found is through the growth and new systems and everything being kind of put in, sometimes I can migrate to another tier and I don't lose connectivity. Other times when I migrate, my database is actually migrated and spun up on another environment. And yes, there's a little bit of an outage, but it's extremely minimal. So in that case, if I needed to scale to a higher tier because of performance issues, I'm already kind of taking a hit. So if I have that little blip where we switch over, kind of like an availability group failover or a database mirror failover where it's using a listener port, then if the application just reconnects, then you're probably okay. But there's, we'll call it minimal effort. And then it's secure and compliant for your sensitive data. And you'll kind of understand more about the secure and compliant stuff as we step through the features. You'll see that security was really at the forefront of the developers' concerns. I mean, there's a lot of new security features that were built into Azure that we now have seen made available in SQL Server 2016. First thing for me is backups. So as a production DBA, my primary concern is being able to recover my clients. When I worked for a very large or a big regional bank, my team, we were responsible for all backup and recovery and high availability for all the data assets, except for MySQL. So to me, if we had a bunch of failed backups and say transaction logs were failing as well, the number one priority was to get those backups caught up. Because if we had an issue at that moment, we had potential data loss. So there was nothing more critical. If we had a team that was waiting on us to do something else that was related to project work, I didn't care. That stuff can wait. We have a critical issue where we don't have backups. So this is very important to me. So when I started looking at Azure SQL Database, I wanted to know, well, how can I do backups? How do I handle restores? How is any of that different? And I found out it's completely different. I can't actually do a backup. I can export data, but I can't do a backup database to disk. The backups are handled for me, and I'm responsible for handling the restore. Now, the restore is pretty cool because I can do point-in-time restore without having to do a with stop at through T-SQL commands, and your retention is based upon your tier. When I first started, basic was 7 days, standard was 14, and premium was 35. And I had a huge issue with having to pay a premium service for backup retention. And I was glad to see that almost a year ago, Microsoft made the change, and now standard and premium both have 35-day retention for your backups. So within those 35-day retention period, you can restore back to any point in time during those 35 days. A caveat is anytime you do a Azure SQL Database restore, it restores as a new database. So if you're paying per database, let's say I have a premium 1 tier and I'm paying almost $500 a month for that database. When I restore my database, it wants to restore as the same premium tier. And it may be that my database is in that threshold where it falls into premium and I can't restore it to a standard because of the database size. So I have to restore it as a P1. Well, I restore it as a P1, depending, what are you restoring it for? Are you restoring to grab some data that was updated incorrectly and you're just going to do a select into or an insert into? Or do you need to restore and you need to rename the current production to production.old and the restored copy to the production name, restart your application? So you basically wanted to do a restore with overwrite, but you couldn't, so you have to do a restore and then rename production and the new restored copy. Well, regardless, whatever you have to do to get that data back, when you're done, you are paying for this database. So you might want to kind of keep tabs on that. And as soon as you're comfortable, then delete that restored copy or the old copy that you've restored over or replaced. So just be aware that when you restore, it is a new database. If you're in a pool, an elastic pool, then you have a little bit of wiggle room there. But I've heard of clients or different individuals that restored. They just needed to grab a copy of a table, copied it over, left the database out there. They really didn't catch it until their billing came through, and then they had a rather large bill. I see that a couple have asked if this deck is going to be available. You can currently get it at timradney.com. Click on presentations. You'll see where I've presented the Azure talk numerous times. So all these hyperlinks are available to you. I can also send it to Joseph. He can send out to the group. So you don't have to worry about having to type these URLs or take notes. Anything on the slide, you'll have. All right, so let's talk about features, some cool things. If you were in a room, I would ask how many people have played with SQL Server 2016 already. I'm hoping that by now, with 2016 being out for a year and a few months, that you've at least downloaded Developer Edition and played around with it. But there's a lot of new features that are available in 2016. And I want you to know that those features had been available in Azure, in some cases 18 to 24 months before they were available in SQL Server 2016. So dynamic data masking is one of those. So with dynamic data masking, you limit access to sensitive data by how it appears. So you can go in if you had account numbers, credit card numbers, email addresses, phone numbers, things like that. You could alter how that data appears when it's queried. So it's not actually changing the data, how it's stored. It's a rule that's applied, and so when that data is selected, it masks it in the application or the report, which is kind of cool. So if you, I always give the example, when I worked at a bank, we had tellers, and the tellers really didn't need to see, let's say, a customer's email address, maybe their phone number. They're not able to go and make updates to that information. If you had to come in and make a change to your email address, your phone number, your address, any of that stuff, you had to go see basically a representative at the branch, sitting at one of the desk. So those are customer service representatives, not tellers. So teller line didn't need to see that information. And let's say that someone thought that one of the customers came in, was attractive, and they pulled their account up and they were able to get their email address and their phone number, and they start calling that customer. well, now we have a violation of privacy. That could be litigation for the bank. So we could circumvent that by not letting any of the tellers see that information, or we could mask it. So if they wanted to confirm email address, we could get name, but not the @AOL.com. So just things like that. There's lots and lots of reasons, especially when you start getting into financial data, where reports, there's really no reason to see the full account number, but you want to see the last 4 digits just for confirmation. To make any of these changes is just clicking a few fields. You can go in, choose the schema, the table, the row, and then choose which rules to apply, click save, or give it a name, click save, and it's there. It's almost instantaneous. And again, no physical changes are made. But let's say you want to take that a step further. We have row level security. So with row level security, you're limiting what data the user can see based upon their identity. So this takes it a step further. Let's say we have a million rows of data in a table. And again, I'll revert back to the financial situation. So we were a bank, and we had customers that were external to the bank, and some customers actually were bank employees. Well, back to the teller, and maybe even the CSRs. We don't want them to be able to look at employee records so that they're not curious to go in and look and see how much someone's direct deposit was. So in that case, we have certain people that are deemed able to see employee data, and then everyone else can see regular external customer data. So in that case, we could apply a rule that says if employee status equals yes or true, then only members of a certain group can see that. So again, this is a logic that's applied at the database tier. It's not actually changing the data, but if a teller CSR didn't belong to that group that allowed them to see that data, let's say that million rows, 800,000 as external customer, 200,000 as internal. If they did a select count from that table, they would see 800,000 records. So to them, the data just doesn't even exist. Admins, they query, do a select star or count star, they would see 1 million records. So very, very cool. And again, there's nothing sophisticated you have to do. So you don't have to do crazy views based upon different application sets or logins. This is just a rule that you apply at the database tier and get creative. So let's take in security a step further. So we've had transparent data encryption since 2008. With transparent data encryption, which happens to be on the next slide, it's going to encrypt the data at rest. So your transaction logs, your backups, TempDB, those things would be encrypted, and it's going to encrypt the data at rest. But if you had access to your SQL Server Management Studio, username, password, you query, you see all the data. Well, so yes, you're protected if somebody came in with a forklift and took the storage array, that they're not going to be able to decipher that data. It's encrypted. All your backups are encrypted. So yay, you get the checkbox for some of these regulatory requirements that you've encrypted the data at rest. Large SANs and the RAID levels. I mean, I could go on for days about how it's already pretty well protected because it's all scrambled across many disks. They truly would have to have the whole array to do some serious damage, but it meets the requirements. We've had to implement it in many cases, but it's still from a hacker aspect. If someone were able to breach and they got access through a firewall to the database assets and they could query, they could still read plain text data. They could read all the data. With always encrypted, you're now going to be applying certificates to the systems that truly need to access the data. And so with this, your clients encrypt the sensitive data inside the applications, and they don't reveal those encryption keys to the database engine. So the data is encrypted as it's stored in SQL Server. So it never appears as plain text within the system. So only your client applications and app servers that have access to those keys can decipher that data. And with Azure SQL Database, we have the Azure Key Vault, so the keys can be stored there for safekeeping. If you've ever dealt with encryption, like backup encryption, you've come to realize that your master key, your encryption certificates, all those things, if you don't have them, you can't restore them, you don't have proper key management, then in some cases you may end up with a very, very large virtual doorstop because you've encrypted your backup. You need to restore it to another system. Your encryption cert's not on that system. You don't know where you backed it up. You don't remember the password that you encrypted it with. So you can't restore the key. You call Microsoft and you get that dreadful news of there's no backdoor. So you have this 200 gig encrypted backup that you can't restore. So having a key vault, so proper key management is crucial. So I'm glad to see that we do have the Azure Key Vault for this. And at least in this case, if someone got on your network and say the data asset was not locked down behind firewalls, and they were able to do a port scan and find it, they don't have that key. So they can't do a whole lot of damage to that very sensitive data that you've encrypted. If your web server was compromised and they exploit it, well, it has the key, so you're in bad shape, but this at least gets you to a much safer place. And it's built in. I mean, it's part of Azure SQL Database. It's also available in SQL Server 2016. I mentioned transparent data encryption already. This third bullet point says does not support Azure Key Vault integration, and it should be does because they've just recently added that. So let's see if I can come in here and delete. So Azure SQL Database does support Azure Key Vault integration with TDE. That was added a few months back. Geo-replication. This is not my favorite feature of Azure SQL Database, but it's probably the number 2. It's now available in all tiers. Early on, you didn't have geo-replication available in basic, and then standard, you had standard geo-replication, and premium, you had active geo-replication. Now you have active geo-replication across all 3 tiers, so basic, standard, and premium. What this does is it provides a replica of your database, so a secondary in a different region. You have an estimated recovery time of less than 30 seconds and an estimated recovery point objective less than 1 hour. Now, I'm not overly excited about the less than 1 hour for an RPO. An hour's worth of data loss could be kind of big. But in reality, with any data center, that type of RPO is pretty good. And especially with the size of Azure SQL, the whole Azure environment. So all the testing that I've done where I would just be shoving data into a database and in the standard and premium tiers, and I would force a failover, I had 0 data loss. So I can only imagine that this less than 1 hour is if the Eastern Seaboard, or let's say the US East or Southeast data center went dark, and I'm being stood up on the Azure West data center where my replica is. That if it was that type of catastrophic event and it was just heavy traffic, I could have up to an hour's worth of data loss. In reality, I would expect it to be much less than that, but that's probably their safety net to know that they can absolutely hit that less than 1 hour, which is still pretty good. So if you need more than that, you may need to get a little bit more creative. And if you need significantly less than that due to some other regulation, then we should probably talk Azure virtual machines running SQL Server with availability groups and all that kind of stuff. But you can read more about geo-replication at this bit.ly link. But again, fantastic. You don't have to set up availability groups. You literally go in and say geo-replication, pick your region, you click go, and it starts synchronizing. And what's awesome is these are readable secondaries. Now, they do come with a cost. You have to pay since it's readable, and they all have to be readable, so you have to pay. But let's say I'm the US location of a UK-based company, and the UK-based company would like to be able to run a lot of reports to look at the data that I did throughout the Eastern US time zone production hours. So I'm like going to bed, they're getting up early in the morning and they're wanting to access data. So instead of them having to view the data across the Atlantic, I have a readable secondary that's in a Europe-based Azure data center. They can be reading from it. They're not looking to do updates, they just need their reporting. So they point their reporting system to the secondary. Well, let's say it's a US-based company, and I'm US East for primary, I'm West for secondary. I want to point all my Power BI to the secondary and offload all reporting to a readable secondary. Well, by doing that, I may drop to a lower tier completely. So if I was a P1 and my database is small enough to fit in a standard, maybe I can go to an S3 for my writes and an S2 or an S1 for my reads. That's all fine. You can have your replica, your geo-replicated copy, be any size within your current tier. So if I'm premium, production's a P6, my readable secondary can be a P1. So I can pay significantly less for that. And if I have to fail over to it, I can spin it up to a P6. So you can get as creative as you want, spend a lot of time. All it is math problems. How much compute do you need? How much do you want to spend? Let those things figure out where the sweet spot is and set that for primary and secondary. And Microsoft loves it. They allow us to do this. It's not really exploiting anything. It's what's available to us. All right, if I can get this to advance. All right, so I mentioned elastic pools on the kind of intro slide. So again, this is a pool of resources. Now we're switching from DTUs. So your individual databases are database transaction units, so DTUs. An EDTU is your elastic database transaction unit. So it becomes a different kind of category of compute. So your elastic pools are this pooled set of resources that individual databases can auto scale within certain parameters. And those parameters are: a basic tier is 5 DTU. That's your only option. You have 5 DTU and up to 2 gigs of a database. You move into a standard tier, you have an S0 through S3. So your S0 is, I think, 10 DTUs. You get up to an S3, you're up to 100 DTUs. So in a standard elastic pool, no one database can consume more than 100 DTUs. So if any of those databases need 125, 150, 250, anything larger than 100, either you need a premium pool, or you need to pull that one database out and let it be a single and pay for its resources and let everything else fall into a standard pool. So again, your options are kind of open a little bit, but you are somewhat restrained based upon whatever the standard tier is for a standard pool. So you're limited to the 250 gig database, no more than 100 DTU per database. You get into your premium, you can basically scale up to your pool limit with a cap at, I believe it's 1,000 DTUs per database. And I think you're limited to a few hundred databases in the basic and standard tiers, and I believe it's a limit of 25 databases in a premium tier. So again, all that's on the bit.ly link. My 2-day Azure course will go into much more details on this, and then I have a workshop that I do that also I can expand, but 1 hour to try to cover so much of this is somewhat limited. You run into time constraints. So again, elastic pools, if you're going to manage a multiple set of databases, you're going to be looking at an elastic pool because it just makes your life so much easier than trying to micromanage individual databases, because individual databases can get somewhat expensive. But again, those multiple databases at an individual level, that cost is about what you're going to see in some of these pools. But again, it really opens you up because you have more wiggle room and you can add to, you can scale up. You'll see as you start diving into it. If anyone is using in-memory OLTP, good news, it's supported in Azure SQL Database, and it's a premium tier feature, and the more that you spend for the higher tiers, or the higher P levels, so P1, P2, P3, as you scale up, you get more storage, or you can have larger in-memory tables. That's all due to the resources. As you scale up, you have more resources available, so you have more available for those memory optimized tables. So I said that geo-replication is probably my second favorite feature. The number one feature is Query Store. So hopefully you've been playing with Query Store. Aaron Stellato has a Pluralsight course on Query Store. I highly recommend just taking the time to watch that, because she really dug in to learn all the little nooks and crannies of Query Store and how to change some of the default settings so Query Store can have more space or less space or capture more stuff more frequently. I mean, all those little dials that you can turn. And then 2, how to dig in and look at the data that Query Store is capturing, because it captures historical information about all the queries. This is important because it enables you to identify those queries that are performing poorly, or those queries that have multiple or different execution plans. So that history of each query, including its associated plans, runtime statistics, and information about resource consumption. So which query is consuming the most CPU, which query is consuming the most IO, which query is doing the worst things, which one is executed the most times. All of those things are important to be able to look at and query, and without having to have a third-party tool in order to do so. This is a database level feature. It is enabled by default now. When it first came out, it was not on by default, so we had to tell everybody, hey, go turn this on so it can start capturing data. Again, about a year, not quite a year ago, it was toward the end of 2016, Microsoft decided that, you know what, it makes 0 sense for this not to be on by default in Azure SQL databases. So we're going to make it a default setting, and then we're going to go back and retro in all existing databases. We're going to flip it on. So that was kind of cool. Index Advisor is another nice feature. So this provides index recommendations that have potential to improve current query performance. So what's that mean? Well, this is not your missing index DMV. It's not your dynamic tuning advisor. There's a lot more sophistication and algorithms that go into making the recommendation. And it's honestly rather difficult to trick or to demo the index advisor, because you have to put such a workload for such a long period of time before it will make the recommendation to create this index. And I've actually had some queries running this evening. Hopefully it will be enough that will trigger, because I do this demo enough. I really should have started it yesterday, but I literally have to run queries hundreds of times that have really bad performance. I mean, it's against a multi-million row table. The cost threshold, or the estimated subtree cost, is like 15 point something. With the proper index, it changes to like 0.003. So a significant improvement. But even that, it has to see it enough before it will recommend to create that index, to make sure it's not just a one-off ad hoc or new report. If it sees the pattern over time, it will make that recommendation. So that's really kind of cool. You're missing index DMV, you can run a query one time and it recommends 17 indexes, and it could be a query that the system will never ever see it again. So do you really need to create that index? No. So in this case, you can really put more weight in the recommendation than what we've ever had before with DTA or the missing index DMV. So it's definitely something fun to play with. All right, so lots and lots of new things. And again, most of all of that is available in 2016. What are some of the things that we're used to that we can't really do? So there's no SQL Server agent. Okay, why is this important? If you've been a SQL Skills Insider, a couple of months ago, I did a series on database maintenance for Azure SQL Database. Do we still, or are we still responsible for index maintenance, statistics updates, running DBCC check DB, things like that? And the answer is yes, we are. So if there's a physical issue with the storage and things, Microsoft will fail over. But if you have some logical corruption, it's not detecting and doing anything there. So we still need to run check DB. What do you do if you find corruption? Well, it's just like you do with regular production. You need to restore to a point in time prior to that corruption occurring. Or in this case, you need to, since you have a backup and it's going to restore the full and go forth. It's something I haven't been able to create, but if that corruption were to happen, I need to know it's there so I don't go long periods and have problems. Important is your fragmentation. You're still going to get index fragmentation from inserts, updates, and deletes. And this isn't all SSD super fast storage. You're not going to have enough memory to put your entire database in RAM. So fragmentation is still quite important. And then your statistics is still the query optimizer. Statistics are super important so that we can generate the most efficient execution plan. So those things are still on us to take care of. So we don't have SQL Server agent. How do we handle this? Well, easiest thing is an Azure virtual machine running SQL Server. You can spin up a lightweight single core 3 or 4 gig of RAM Azure VM with SQL Server installed and use SQL Server agent there. But that's going to cost you a little bit, the $50 a month. That could also be your jump box. I mean, it's kind of nice to have. You can leverage PowerShell. You can also leverage a on-premise SQL Server agent. So if you're kind of in a hybrid situation where you still have local virtual machines, you can set up a connection using database maintenance plans or just a SQL agent job, and your connection strings your Azure connection and pass the credentials and run your maintenance there. There are things built into the cloud though, which are great. So you have Azure automation and you have Elastic Jobs. So let's say it's your standard index optimization. You're going to use Ola Hallegren's process, and you want this to run across 50 databases all in an elastic pool. Well, as long as you add that, the execution or the stored procedures there, you can run that against every database in the pool. If you have individual databases, Azure Automation, you connect to each one and you can run the same type of procedure. There's multiple ways of handling this. And I've heard rumor there's maybe more of a SQL Server agent-ish type process in the future, but really Azure Automation is pretty slick, and you can use Azure Automation to manage everything in Azure. So it may just be that there's more tools and things that we can use there. The other thing is database mail. There's no database mail support. Events, event notifications, query notifications, basically anything using Service Broker, you can't do. SQL Server Trace Profiler, again, rumor mill. We may see a profiler trace type feature in the future. Extended events work. So I don't know why we would see a trace profiler, but I guess if enough people need it and it's easy for them to deploy to shut us up, we'll see it. Trace flags. Now, a lot of these things kind of make sense. If you have trace profiler, why? Well, if you had it, you could see things at the instance level, and we're not really seeing instance level stuff. We're seeing individual databases. So there may be one temp DB, multiple containers on that instance serving different folks. If you could see run trace profiler, it's not just database specific. It could open things up. Trace flags would affect the entire instance. Things like that is in my head why we don't have support. So they were never built in. There's no SSIS, but we do have Azure SQL Data Factory. Reporting services, SSRS. We have Power BI. There is going to be a Azure Analysis Services that's may still be in preview, maybe out of preview by now. So I used to say there's no SSAS, and now there kind of is. Log shipping, database mirroring, transactional replication. A caveat there is Azure SQL Database can be a subscriber for replication, but it can't be a publisher. So transactional replication is a method of migrating from on-premise to Azure SQL Database. It's not my favorite. I've found very few databases that even fit the criteria by having a primary key on every table that needs replication. So for me, I use different methods for getting my data from on-premise to the cloud or to Azure. All right, so we've talked for a good bit, like half an hour now, on what Azure SQL Database can do, what it can't do. Let's take a look at the Azure portal, and we'll create an Azure SQL Database, and then we'll also demo that DTU calculator. So we'll switch back. I'll see if I can easily switch over to a virtual machine. I'm going to give it a second to make sure that the YouTube picks up on this new screen. Okay, I'm still not seeing the YouTube update, but it could just be a longer delay. So we're going to talk about creating an Azure SQL database. We're in the portal, so we'll go ahead and we'll start here. Now we can click New, and under New we have the Marketplace. So all things Azure that we can select from. So you have compute, networking, storage. Under here we see databases. If we click on databases, we'll see first one is a SQL database. So that's your Azure SQL database. You have SQL Data Warehouse, an Elastic Database Pool, Azure Database for MySQL, Postgres, an Azure Virtual Machine running SQL Server, Cosmos DB, Database as a Service for MongoDB. You know, lots to choose from. Now we wanted SQL Database. I could click here, but at the same time, if I go back to my portal, and I look here, we have SQL databases listed. And I know that's what I want to create, so I'll click on SQL databases. If we need to create a new one, we can click Add. And we'll just call this one AZ Demo. You choose your subscription and your resource group. So I want to use existing. I'm going to put this in my Azure demo. And then we're going to do a blank database. An option is AdventureWorks Lite, or we can restore from an Azure backup. So not a SQL Server backup, but an Azure backup. We'll stick with a blank database. I'm going to put this one on my SQL Performance container. If I wanted to join an Elastic pool, I could choose yes, and then choose which pool I want to connect to. So I did one for an insider demo. I could choose there, but we're not going to add this one to a pool. And then we specify pricing tier. So in this case, it wants to default to an S3. And we can see that an S3 is $150 a month. While we're here, we'll play around with some of these and show you kind of the pricing. But Joseph, I have not seen the YouTube update with the Azure database demo. To me, it looks like it's still stuck on unsupported features. Okay, well, I'll keep going. So we'll click on Basic, and we'll see that the Basic tier drops to $4.99 per month. If we go back to a Standard, we can start with an S0. We see here 10 DTUs, S0 is $15 a month. Your S1 is 20 DTU, $30. 50 DTU, $75. And then the top is the S3 at $150. If we step into the premium, I'm not going to go through all of them, but we jump from 100 DTU to 125. We go from $150 a month to $465. But our storage now goes up to half a terabyte, so 500 gig. If we max out at a P15, we have 4,000 DTUs at $16,000 a month, and we can go up to a terabyte. Now, in some regions, that's been increased to 4 terabytes. I don't know what the magic sauce is to get to the 4 terabytes, but I'm sure you can reach out to Microsoft and get that if you need it, if you're spending this kind of money. So I'm not that rich. So we're going to drop back down to the $4.99. And at this point, I could click Apply. And we've now chosen our pricing tier, and I can change the correlation. I can click Create. it will now create an Azure database called AZ Demo with a blank schema and 5 DTUs. All right, so let's get out of here and we'll say we're not going to save. And we're going to open up SQL Server Management Studio. And I'm going to come over to my SQL performance.database.windows.net. So that was the one I'm connected to here. So if we take a look at this particular database, AdventureWorks, our connection string, our server name, SQL performance.database.windows.net. So this is the one we're going to be working in. If I want to create a new database, I'll right click and say New Database. And it gives us a default script. So we can create database, we can provide a database name. So this is where I had previously said AZ Demo. My addition, this is going to be basic, standard, or premium. And then my service objective. So is it a S0, 1, 2, 3, a P1, 2, 3, 4, on up to a P15. And that's kind of it. And I'm sure there's a place in here you can add the correlation if you were going to change that, but there's a lot of things that we're used to seeing that are not available here. We can't specify the number of data files, the location of the data files, the auto growth of the data files. I mean, any of that stuff that we're used to doing, we can't specify. We give it a database name, the correlation, how much we want to spend on it. And that's about it. All right, so I kept mentioning, or we've talked about the 5 DTUs, 10 on up to 4,000 DTUs. And you may be wondering, okay, Tim, that's great, but that seems kind of like voodoo. How do I know how many DTUs that I need for my system? And I'm really glad that you asked that question, because we have this wonderful tool called the DTU calculator. So the DTU calculator is on the website. So dtucalculator.azurewebsites.net.
Hey, Tim, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yeah, just kind of a reminder that you that in 10 minutes we'll open it up for questions because we do stop at 6. But yeah, we can definitely see on the YouTube live now. It is definitely updating. I don't know what the issue was, but I think it's now updated on live, so we're good to go.
Excellent.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, so with the DTU calculator, you can download. So you have a command line utility or PowerShell script. I like the command line utility, and you're going to see why in just a second. But all it's collecting is your percent processor time, your disk reads writes per second, and log bytes flush per second. You run the tool. By default, it wants to run for an hour or 60 minutes, so an hour. And with the command line executable, what you can do is add it to a job and let it run, or like a Windows scheduled task. So here it is. You have a config file. The config file tells you your counters. You can specify where the files are outputted to, and then how long. And by default, this is 3,600 seconds. I changed it to 60 because I don't want to run a demo for a full hour. And you can see the files that it's created here from other demos that I've done. So I'll open one up, and you see all it is perfmon counters with the date time. So no confidential information here. So every time you kick this thing off, it's going to run. It's going to create a new file with the date time extension. So if every hour this kicked off, it's going to create a new file. So you can then take that file and upload it to the website and see during that point in time, what was your estimated DTU that you would need. So you can't just run it once, let it run for an hour and say, hey, we need an S2. You need to run this over your normal business time. And so you may need to import in 100 different files or something to cover enough time, and then take the averages of that. So in this case, I've run this, and I've run it on 3 different client machines. So I had one, this was a production system. It was 2 vCPU. I ran it during the peak time, and it came back and said it's a basic. So they had one little spike up to 125 DTUs for that one little second. Is coming back and saying that almost 95% of this fell within a basic tier. So I'm like, wow, they're paying how much for this SQL Server license? And then I had a machine that was 4 vCPU. It was 4 vCPU, 28 gig of RAM, came back as an S3, so this would be $150 a month. machine. You can see it did peak up into a P2 region, but for the most part, it's well underutilized. Now, I can use this tool and click on more details and see what pushed this to an S3. So I'm looking here, and CPU was S3, IO was an S2, the log performance was an S0. So this probably is a good candidate for an S3, possibly a P1 if they're expecting to scale and grow. Now their big machine was 8 vCPU and 128 gigs of RAM. So this was their biggest production system. Came back a P4. That's kind of a costly machine. The DTUs over time did have some peaks up to a P6. But we look at that more details, and we see CPU was almost 87% of CPU is what threw this into a P4. IO is a P1. Well, P1 is $500. This is more like $2,000. And then a basic for log activity. So wow, there's opportunity here to performance tune. So if I can tune this system, which we have done for a couple of clients, at SQL Skills, they've come up, we've been contracted to assist migrating to Azure SQL Database. We run this, we take a look and find they have a ton of explicit conversions and just some bad things going on. We tune their workload and we drop them from a P6 down to a P2 region, and that's significant cost savings month over month. So this is a cool tool for multiple reasons, but this lets us know kind of what we need to be looking at. And if this was a elastic pool, I simply click Elastic Databases. File again. And again, this machine did have like 20-something different databases on it. So this was the overall workload for all the systems. So this truly would need to be an elastic pool. So they're in an 868 eDTU pool. When we did the tuning for the other client, dropped them significantly down because you have, I think it's a 500, a 750, 1,000. So in this case, they would need to be in 1,000 to have that wiggle room. So again, lots of stuff to play with here. So we'll switch back over to the slides and finish out. All right, so we did creating an Azure database from within the portal itself and within SQL Server Management Studio. The DTU calculator, how to run it, where to get it, how to configure it. And so let's say we have a database that's been running, what are things that we're used to doing on premise or on a local SQL Server instance that we can or can't do in Azure. So one of the things is anything instance related. You can't configure tempdb, cost threshold for parallelism, max degree parallelism. You can't set min max server memory, optimize for ad hoc workloads. So basically anything requiring SP configure or reconfigure, you can't do. Global temp tables are not supported. I found this when I switched over and was trying to run Paul's scripts. And I found that I can't sit there and run the file stats over time, wait stats over time, because they were using global temp tables, changed them to local temp tables, made a couple more changes, and standard scripts work. You can't run DBCC free proc cache. It's not supported either. So first tuning option, throw hardware at it. We do that by moving up DTU tiers. So from a basic to a standard, standard to premium, or within the standard tier, within the premium tier. In some cases, you just have to move to a faster system. If your workload is increasing, business should be increasing. You're making more money. Sometimes you have to spend money to make more money. So that's not always a bad thing. If you've doubled your clientele, you may have to throw some more hardware or IO at this system. It may also be other things. The size of your database may move you from standard to premium. The number of connections that you need, the size of your in-memory L2P tables. I mean, lots of things can cause you to need to move up outside of just performance. So this little graph, although it's dated, is a good representation of your DTUs and concurrent requests, login sessions, those types of things. So outside of that, outside of throwing hardware, how do you tune? Again, minor changes to your existing workload script should work. I modified the file statistics script that we have out on Paul's blog from sysmaster files to sys databases, the file stats over time, like I said, the global temp tables, and I documented these changes for these 4 scripts out on a SQL performance article that's at the bottom of the screen. But looking at file stats, looking at wait stats, all that stuff still matters. And with your wait stats, we have a new DMV. So instead of sysdm OS wait stats, we have sysdm DB wait stats. So from OS, we'll tell you container level, but we want to know database level. And so that's an Azure DMV. So sysdm DB wait stats. So you take Paul's wait statistics, or please tell me where it hurts, change the OS to DB, run it as is, and it works. If you're using the over time, got to still make the same changes with the temp tables. So we have a tuning demo, and then we'll come back and say, hey, this is all the stuff that we covered. So the tuning demo is pretty quick. So we'll switch over to Management Studio. And what I wanted to show you, sometimes I go in and I show the file stats and the wait stats. I mean, those are pretty self-explanatory. But let's say, one of the approaches I take is when I'm looking at a system to do overall tuning, I like to look at the overall procedure cache and see what queries have been executed the most. And I start looking there. So hopefully this will either connect or time out. I'll try to kill it. So with this particular query, I get the use counts of the different execution plans to see which have been executed the most. Yeah, I figured it's been sitting here idle and my internet's probably dropped during these storms. So we'll try to reconnect. All right, so from here I have a lot of internal things that Azure is running, but I'm going to try to look for something that says select sales order ID. And should be, anyway, I might have crashed out before then. Or anyway, so we'll run this one just a handful of times. But anyway, so good demo here. So we have all this stuff and I'm like, all right, I don't know how old this is. And if you try to run your standard DBCC free proc cache, it's going to fail. DBO doesn't have permission to run. So we can do an alter database scoped configuration until it clear procedure cache. And now when we go back and run this, it's empty, it's gone. So I'm going to run a query, just let it loop through half a dozen or 5 times so we can get some data in there. And we're going to pretend we're going to add like 7 zeros to our result sets. All right, so we'll kill that. We take a look again. And we see that, select sales order ID from the table. So this was executed 3 million times. All right, we want to take a look at that particular query. So we run that query and we want to look at the execution plan. So we've chosen to include actual. And we take a look and we'll see that, the actual execution plan, we have a table scan, which is bad. Estimated subtree cost is 15.83. It just needs a basic index. So if we were to create that index, which just takes a second. So while it's looping through that, I know we're going to have time for Q&A. I'll step in here. I want to show you how cool the geo-replication is. So we're connected to our AdventureWorks. We're clicking on geo-replication. It's going to load a map. This map's pretty cool because you get to see where all the other Azure regions are at. And we see those with the little green octagons, and they're all showing that they're healthy. Now I've currently connected here in the US East, and I have a target region that's already been configured in the West because that's my favorite, or what Microsoft recommends for the East is to go here. But you can see I have them all over the world. So maybe I want to have my replica down in Australia somewhere. So anyway, so we're going to choose the West, and it pops up, and I want a readable secondary target server. I've already got one configured, so I say Radney West. Pricing tier is an S0, which is the cheapest I can get in the standard tier. If I click OK, it's going to go ahead and then boom, it's going to start syncing up. Deployment's in process, so it's basically a backup restore and then setting up like a database mirror availability group type. Since this is pretty small, it shouldn't take that long. It's currently seeding. We'll come back to here. We've created our index, so we'll take a look at that query again and see, did we make a difference by creating a non-clustered index for that particular query? We now have a seek, and our estimated subtree cost dropped from 15.8 to 0.003. So we went to 16 rows red versus whatever it was before, which was in the hundreds of thousands. So I'm going to drop this index. So I'll be prepared for my next demo. And we'll go back to here. It's still seeding. Usually doesn't take too terribly long. And you see here I have a forced failover. And click back. Go back to the geo replication to force it to kind of update and see where we're at. So it's still seeding. All right, so we'll switch back over to our PowerPoint. So we talked about what is Azure SQL Database, database as a service, what all it does, what it can't do yet. Showed you how to create the database in the portal and Management Studio. Talked about the DTU calculator, showed you how to run it, and then tuning differences. So we have some time. So here somebody said it's blurry.
Okay, can you hear us now, Tim?
I can.
Great. Anybody have any questions here in the live audience? Yeah, go for it, Robert.
I was curious if, and for transparent data encryption, for those environments that push their production database back to dev, do you have to have a certificate in both, or will that even work still?
Okay. I couldn't quite hear the question.
Let me repeat it for you because I'm a lot closer. For transparent data encryption, do you have to repeat? What was it you said, Robert?
For a lot of people, they take a copy of the production database, use it in dev.
Okay, so if you take your production database, you take your production database and put it to dev, and you've got transparent data encryption, do you need 1 or 2 keys? Is that the question?
Well,
yeah. What do you do with keys?
Yeah, once it's in Azure, I mean, if you needed another copy, I know that you can create another database and it be a copy of production, and you can restore that back up. I guess if it's in a different container, you would probably need either the same key or have, yeah. I mean, if it was backed up and encrypted with a 1 key, you'd need that key on your other container. But if they're in the same container, I wouldn't think it's a problem. But I really haven't tested that. That's a good question. If it's something that you're looking at doing, email me, tim@sqlskills.com, and I'll reach out to the Azure team.
Another question?
Can you use it as a backend for SharePoint?
Can you use Azure DB as a backend for SharePoint?
As of this time, I don't think so. I know that there are, SharePoint in the Azure SharePoint environment, but just like we can't use it today for reporting services. So,
okay.
That's
it. No, but it's just a question.
Thanks. Any other questions? Anybody? Yep.
I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, so bear with me. Whenever you talk about training with Azure, one of the things that comes up a lot of times is you're spinning up an instance, and if you forget to turn it off, then you're racking up all these charges. So I saw that when you were setting your tiers and it was suggesting the price of $4.99, is there the cap? Is there a way to say, if my transactions exceed what I'm doing, because this is my test database, I don't want to forget to turn something off. How do I set a threshold where I don't exceed in a certain amount?
That's it. Tim, the question is there a way to set up an Azure DB so that you will not go over the dollar amount that you choose to spend?
Yes. So what you saw was the cap. I mean, that's you're going to pay $4.09 or up to $4.99 a month. So you're thinking of Azure virtual machines. So Azure virtual machines, you can spin those up, and they can have a monthly cost of $700, and you only want to run it for an hour. You're going to pay that hour charge, whatever that 700 divided by 734 hours in a month, or whatever that value is. But yes, if you forgot to spend that down, all of a sudden you have a $700 bill. With Azure SQL Database, it's per database, so there's no additional compute cost. If we come in here and we look at pricing, that's what you pay. So I have this one set at an S0. I will only pay $15 a month for this database.
And that's data coming in and data coming out, right?
Right. There's none of the ingress charges and stuff that you see with Azure VMs.
Because Azure SQL Data Warehouse is a little different. You pay by DWU and
I don't even think Microsoft understands how they bill for Azure SQL Data Warehouse.
Give me all your checkbook.
It's pretty much if you don't have an AMX black card, don't talk to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
Any other questions?
when you get into Stretch database, which uses Azure SQL database, it's a completely different beast, and you're paying.
Yeah, that's another give me all your credit cards.
Yes, and they don't like me to talk about Stretch, so that's why it's not in the text.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
I don't know. I like to comment. I love Azure SQL DB because you can just push it up, create it. I do my demo, and then I can bring it back down. I don't pay anything. I really like the functionality to be able to spin up a P11, for an hour or two and work with so many gigs of OLT in memory and stuff like that. But I think it's really accessible, and I've worked with it. Proof of concept as well as a company. I've done the query store stuff with Azure SQL DB, so it's really helpful.
Yeah, if anybody wants to play around with Azure too, you can get, I believe it's $25 free of Azure if you register with Visual Studio. I know that's not a ton of dough, but you can definitely do a lot with Azure DB with that kind of money. And all you have to do is download the community edition of Visual Studio and register it, and you'll get 25 free Azure dollars. So if you want to play with it, you can.
Yeah, and at $4.99, I mean, you can't get a Starbucks coffee for that. You can be playing with all of the 2016 type features, and it's going to be Azure first. So if you want to really get in there and play, 2 GB database, you really don't need more than that. I mean, you can take AdventureWorks, move it up, all your demos and testing, and play with all these security features. I mean, you don't have to be in that big premium tier to play with it. And we do have the Premium RS, which is available now, but it makes it more affordable. But like Joe was saying, you can spin one up, play with it for an hour, and you do get billed for that hour. If it's up for 5 minutes, you're paying for an hour. So take full advantage of that hour, and then you can delete it, and you're not paying. So you pay a few cents for it.
Does anybody else have any questions? Nope. Well, I think we're good. Thanks so much, Tim. Really appreciate you taking time out to do this.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, Tim. Like we said before, you did a great job this year and last year. So, is there anything else that you want to say in ending, Tim?
No, just if anyone has any questions or follow up, feel free, reach out. I learned through your questions, so don't hesitate. It could be about Azure. It could be about tilapia, goats, chickens. I don't care. I like to talk.
Thanks, crew, for getting on, and hope to see you guys next month. We don't have a scheduled meeting yet. You'll have to wait and see the emails and meet up to find out, but it's in the works. So very excited. Sign up for SQL Saturday, Phoenix BI. Go to the site. Make sure you get in before we cap our registration at 150. So really exciting stuff next couple months, and don't forget to look at Past Summit. Very exciting time there as well. So thanks for everybody for getting online.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.